And a pleasure to be joined by Sergei Netessine, Wharton Professor, to talk about corporate venturing, which is something that he knows quite a bit about. Sergey, this is an interesting concept. I guess give us the backstory on what it is and how it potentially has an impact.
Well, then, so if you go back 30, 40, even 20 years ago, I think big corporations and startups lived in pretty separate worlds. They, didn't hire the same people, didn't go to the same conferences, didn't really overlap a lot, and they faced really different issues. Startups were hungry for capital, and corporations were hungry for ideas. But then, fast forward to our times, it's kind of hard to imagine any big corporation to move forward with innovation without a startup's help. So, if you look at OpenAI partnering with Microsoft, or maybe Anthropic partnering with Amazon, these are partnerships that are absolutely necessary to get AI, for example, in this case, off the ground, because investments are so massive and the amount of innovations that you need is massive as well. So that's why increasingly we see corporations and startups uniting and kind of helping each other.
So, but obviously, the venture component of it becomes very much important because of all of the money that is kind of tied up in these components, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, startups are hungry for cash, and corporations have cash and have money to invest. And I think historically, 20, 30 years ago, kind of the predominant way for corporations to partner with startups would be what is called corporate venture capital. So corporation would set up a venture fund, and this venture fund would invest in startups, and that was okay. That's perfectly fine way to invest in innovation. But the problem with that is, a, it requires a lot of money. So corporate venture
Yeah.
capital fund is 200-300 million dollars probably, and b, you don't see results of that investment for a long, long time, and it's mostly monetary benefits. So you don't necessarily learn that much from startups. You don't necessarily infuse your company with innovation right away, at least.
The expectation is that these are the type of partnerships we're going to see more of as we move forward here in the next several years because of the importance of AI.
I would say so for sure, and I've done this kind of report some 10 years ago, and then now we've done it again at Wharton with several colleagues, and we see that all kinds of practices around corporate venturing are increasing. So we see some old practices. We see corporate venture capital, of course, that doesn't go away. We see more and more accelerators and incubators launched by large companies. We see all kinds of business services that large companies offer to startups. Often they create a common co-working workspace and run events with startups. But then what's interesting, we started seeing a couple of new practices. For example, one is venture building, when a corporation actually builds a venture internally, finds a problem to solve, identifies who can solve this problem, and then says, look, we're going to create a kind of a sandbox for you. You're not going to have to follow our rules or KPIs or whatever. So you kind of like a startup, but created by a corporation. So you don't need to worry about funding, for example. Company will give it to you. Another very interesting practice is what we call venture clienting. And venture clienting is when um, corporation becomes a client for a startup. So startup becomes kind of a supplier for a big corporation. And these two practices, we have not seen them all that much like 10 years ago even. And they're really growing, and they're really impactful. We think this is kind of shows you an evolving space of corporate venturing, taking new shapes and engaging more and more corporations and startups.
With the component of the venture being one that is bringing companies together from different sides of the equation as we move forward here.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think what is particularly interesting about this new practices like venture clienting, they allow big company to innovate from day one. So Imagine you want to bring a novel product or service to banking clients, and you're a big bank, you have a bunch of clients. You can sign up immediately, startup as a supplier, connect startups through an API, and offer this new product or service to your clients right away. And the benefit is, of course, the risk is somewhat reduced, because if it doesn't go well, you just say, okay, we are not going to offer this product or service anymore, and you kind of disconnect from startup, remove the startup. And for a startup, believe it or not, investment is not as valuable as having a large corporation as a client, because that gives a real proof that startups innovation works. Startup can take this kind of agreement that they have with a big company and bring it to other big companies, sign them up as clients, and that gives them a revenue stream for many years to come, not just a single investment that they would get before.
And from the relationship perspective, being the client does not concern certain entities more so than being a partner? They are okay with this.
I think so, yeah. So, for example, as you can imagine, for banks are very heavily regulated, and there are all kinds of data
Sure.
protections and so on. So, it's very hard for banks to innovate. It's very hard for them to, create new things internally. And with a startup, as a kind of, provider of a new product or service, you can always say, like, look, we are trying things. If it doesn't go well, we can make it go away relatively quickly without spending really any money on innovation. But if it works, then you have all kinds of options. Now you can think about investing in startup, or acquiring a startup, or just letting startup grow and continue to be a client for this startup.
Where do you expect then this concept and this process to take us moving forward in the years ahead?
We expect it to penetrate more and more industries. So what we are seeing right now, for example, adoption of various practices of collaboration between startups and big companies, it's very uneven. Um, for venture clienting, it's actually relatively big already. About 40% of the world's largest companies are already adopting venture clienting. But for example, in transportation industry, we see that about 43% of big Fortune 500 companies are adopting venture clienting, but in construction it's only 16%. So there is big disparity. So we think it's just going to be becoming bigger and bigger across the entire spectrum of various industries.
Will this, though, at some point probably draw at least some questioning from the regulatory side about, this process being maybe slightly different than what the traditional process is?
Certainly, and I think there is always scalability risk. So a startup solution may work in a pilot, but then you scale it to many people, and it fails. And I'm sure there's going to be some disasters that we're going to learn about.
Right.
There are issues on IP and confidentiality. Effective integration is difficult, and there is cultural mismatch. So dealing with a big corporation, approval hierarchies, process compliance, and so on. So I think if corporation kind of ensures that the startup that they work with is compliant, and there is a procurement discipline, then there is a way to mitigate many of those risks.
What ends up being the greatest benefit for startups in general by being a part of this process?
Startups are looking to demonstrate product market fit to their investors. That's why they get investments. If they demonstrate that whatever they're creating has market demand, that's kind of a big part of the success of the startup. And there is no better way to demonstrate this when you can say, hey, a big company signed up for my product or service. They're using it. I'm getting paid for it. That's the proof of the concept. Then you can take this to investors and raise more money, and then continue raising money. So I think it's kind of in many ways a win-win for both a startup and a big company. So I expect this kind of practice to continue growing.
How is this impacting the work you're doing at Wharton and your colleagues in terms of teaching this?
Wharton sometimes, believe it or not, becomes a customer for startups. So we constantly revisit all kinds of solutions that startups provide. We look around, we test them out, and we adopt some of them, be it a research tool or sometimes it's a teaching tool. So we are also a pretty big corporation. We are a big company for them, slow company, kind of slow moving company, but that for us is also one of the easiest ways to innovate by partnering with startups.
Sergey, great to talk to you again. Thanks very much for your time. All the best.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for having me. Always a great pleasure.
Thank you. Wharton Professor Sergey Netessine.